The world went dark 10 days ago. The satellites unresponsive. Everything dark for no reason at all. No reason, at least, that you know about. And 5 days later, they show up. Now, if you find this intro to be very interesting, then I'm sure that you will love the topic of today's episode of the RPG Goblin, which is the RPG called 10 Candles. 10 Candles is a TTRPG that is a tragic horror game. And oh my god, it is absolutely amazing. If you love horror that builds suspense, then you will love 10 Candles. And I brought on Curtis to talk about 10 Candles with me, and this episode was such a joy to record and came out amazing, a little longer than normal, but it was fantastic. We talk about safety tools, which is such an important part of horror games, and I just really hope that you enjoy this episode. So, let's get into it. Content warning before you start the episode. We do end up talking about themes of drug use and suicide within this episode. Not in grave detail, however, those topics do come up, so if you are sensitive to those, please do not listen to this episode. Thank you. All right, so today we are going to be talking about a horror RPG called 10 Candles, which is one that I've seen referenced a few times, but I haven't looked into it much before until I talked to Curtis here. And while we're getting started, Curtis, if you would like to give yourself a quick introduction to everyone.
Hello. Hi, my name is Curtis. I am the executive producer and kind of production guru over at a little channel called 5%Chance. We're a sort of a variety streaming group for various tabletop RPGs. We do a lot of streaming on Twitch. A lot of our stuff goes up onto YouTube afterwards. You may have seen our stuff. We were working with Dumpstat. We were producing their show, The Dark Dominion, which was a Ravenloft-themed D&D game. I'm the DM for the Ash and Shade Committee, which is usually every Wednesday on our Twitch page. And I'm just kind of one of the founding players, is what we like to call ourselves. So we're usually streaming a couple of times a week, getting games up. I'm also an avid lover of a lot of systems other than Dungeons and Dragons, and I keep pushing people to play them. And so when I saw your post being like, "Hey, I want to learn more stuff," I was like, "Have I got a list for you?"
We love that. We love getting into new RPGs. Love it. I mean, I've only played Dungeons and Dragons and Monster of the Week, but I have a shelf full of others that I haven't even started.
My Dungeons and Dragons shelf is 4 books. My other RPG shelf is, or 2 RPG shelves is everything else. So,
oh, we love it so much. Yeah. So, you, when we were talking to arrange this episode, you mentioned 10 Candles, and I thought that would be such a fun game to cover, especially because it is a horror game, and I do love horror. I don't really listen to horror. I don't really watch horror movies, but I've listened to a few horror podcasts, and horror RPGs have been something I've wanted to dabble in. So when you mentioned it, I was super excited, and I would love if you, because you said that you have played quite a few before, if you would love to introduce the kind of world and culture of horror RPGs first before we get started, that would be amazing.
Okay. So, yeah, very similarly to you, I'm not a fan of horror movies particularly, mostly ones that lean into cheap jump scares. I like low underlying suspense and building up tension as best I can. And that's the sort of thing I like in a horror game. And with horror games, you have so much potential, especially in D&D, you're like, oh, that's a really gross monster, or they did really something gross, but you don't get deep, unsettling dread. It's really hard to do that when your character is effectively a superhero.
I mean, you are completely correct.
It's the downside of D&D. Nothing's really scary once you get past level 10, unless it's this world-ending threat. Every single D&D game ends with you killing God. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
Perfect. If you have dark vision, you're fine. You're not worried about anything. But with horror games, you have this potential of having these characters be truly vulnerable to what's around them. And the upside of that is you can tell really interesting stories. And it's going to sound pretentious, but I prefer to be a storyteller rather than a games master, because that is more, that's why I play these games, is to tell really interesting stories and see what happens. And the most important thing in that process is trust in yourself and your other players. And the number one thing, if you want to try and getting into horror games, is making sure that you and your players are safe and are comfortable with the situation, with what's about to happen. And for that, we're going to get into the boring portion here, but the part that I feel is honestly more important than the game itself is safety tools and some of the stuff that folks have come out with. Some of you listening to this podcast probably know what I'm talking about when I say lines and veils, X cards, and consent forms. Those are really my big three. And so we'll start with the consent form, because that's a little more of we'll do this backwards because that's horrifying in and of itself. Consent forms. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So yeah, consent forms you can Google RPG consent form right now into your browser, into your phone, and find 36 options of different forms. And they will tell you kind of, they have various types of fears, things that make people uncomfortable. Find one that works for you and use that. Give it to your players beforehand. If it's kind of a pickup game, you can kind of do a quick version of this with lines and veils, but having it be truly anonymous does help with your players, because some players may not want to sit around a group of potentially strangers and be like, yo, spiders, not my thing. No spiders, please.
Especially when you don't know the people and what kind of people they are, because some people may abuse knowing these types of information.
Right. And so with the consent forms, if you can do it ahead of time, it goes to the GM. And then when you all sit down, the GM goes, cool, here are the lines that we do not cross. Period, full stop. The GM is the one making that statement, so no one has to out themselves or out their particular phobias or discomfort. And that is also part of the more into lines and veils as far as what content the GM is comfortable with. And then knowing that also gives the GM an understanding of when this is happening, if we are approaching this conversational point, they can keep an eye on which players and look for the next thing, which is sort of your X card, which is essentially your big red emergency eject button in the middle of the table, or in a situation like this where you may not be able to see the table for various reasons. You have effectively a safe word, a word that when you say it, the game stops. We either flash back and cut something out, or we cut away to something else completely different. The goal of the X card is just to make sure that if your players get uncomfortable, if someone is unable to verbalize, if they are free or are scared enough or uncomfortable enough that they cannot speak, there's just like an index card with a big X on it in the middle of the table, and they just reach out and tap it, and somebody notices, and all play stops until that player feels comfortable, or if they need to leave, they can leave. But knowing that emergency eject button is there is also just a large comfort for keeping in the middle of the table. Anyone can use it at any time, even the GM. I've had GMs reach for the X card because a player was doing a narration and it made them uncomfortable, and they just reached out, touched the X card, and I loved that the player then stopped what they were doing and just basically stopped it there and passed the scene over to another player.
Oh, and that's great.
As long as everybody understands and respects those rules, then you are in safe hands.
Yeah, and it makes for a much better horror experience, because part of the reason people love horror is being scared in ways that they can kind of control. Like with movies or podcasts, you can stop if it makes you uncomfortable. And in a gaming environment, when you are playing with other people, having a tool that you can use to say, hey, stop, we need to stop this and either bring it back or fix it in some way is the perfect way to keep that control and be scared in a safe way.
Yeah. And in a digital sense, which we can kind of get to a little later. For example, I mentioned the Dark Dominion stream. Brill from the Dubstep podcast, he'll be happy that I'm plugging his show. Is really into horror, but one of the things we do before every stream is I go, hey, everyone remembers what what our safety signal is, right? Everybody knows, and all of the players will put up their hands, kind of doing like the Wakanda Forever salute. They'll just cross their arms in front of their chest like an X. It's a big enough gesture that it will get someone's attention on screen. And then myself or Brill or someone will be able to will stop the show and figure out what's going on.
Absolutely. Because, again, that's amazing.
We can't if someone is upset to the point where they aren't having fun, we're not having fun.
Exactly. And the whole point of gaming is having fun.
Correct. And again, to tell a good horror story, you need to be comfortable enough to take that step and trust that you're not going to have players pushing that boundary because they're assholes. And I'm gonna throw a controversial hot take at you. If you're at a table and the GM is like, I don't believe in safety tools because they're for wimps, you should leave. That player is not that GM is not there to play the game with you. They're there to be God, and that's not the kind of party you want.
Yeah, that's where it gets into the GM versus player mentality, and you do not want to be in a situation like that. Yeah. Nope. No, not an environment you want to be in. So lastly, which we've kind of already gotten to, is lines and veils. And this in a group that is a little more comfortable with each other. Maybe your group has played other D&D games before, and you're comfortable with sharing things that you are completely uncool with or you'd like to shy away from. This is where you kind of go around the table and everyone mentions a thing or two that they are. If you have a long shopping list, I would get that to the GM ahead of time because that might be a lot to remember. But for me, as a GM, I play by what I call the Bethesda rule, because in any Bethesda video game, you cannot kill a kid. That just doesn't happen. You could do like Skyrim, you can Fusroda that kid as far as you want, and that kid will be fine. He'll wander back into town the next day. That's a rule for me. Is no child violence, please. And that goes as far as like violent acts, violence against pets, animals, any kind of sexual encounter. If they're like, we just want none of it, great. That is now a rule in this game. If someone makes a line, if it's a veil, it's like, I'm cool with it happening, but we're going to either fade away, we're going to fade to black. Just kind of cutting away from that action. The activity itself can happen, but I don't want to be there for it. And so thinking of it like a TV show, like the two of them walk into the bedroom and the door shuts, and then we cut to like, another scene somewhere else, or a couple hours later when they're done, and we don't have to sit there for the metaphorical nitty gritty. And it just whatever people are or aren't comfortable with. And for a lot of my groups that I've played with, we don't need the full consent forms because we know each other's boundaries. But anytime I get a group together, I have them do the consent forms, and then I do lines and veils in person, sort of pulling from the consent form and being like, these are the things that are off limits because someone at this table has declared this off limits. Don't call people out. Just go, here's what people don't want. And the hardest part is if somebody crosses that line, you can't really let them get away with it. You can't be like, you get one. It's like, no, you made this person uncomfortable. I need you. Like, if they push past that line, if someone like disrespects the X card or knowingly crosses that line, that person should be excused from the room. Because especially in horror, people are already going to be vulnerable enough. And things can already get uncomfortable.
Correct. If you are comfortable in a horror game, you're either in the first act or it's not going. The threat hasn't shown up yet. Is really like the goal of a horror game. But but yeah, and so that's the end of my rant on safety tools. That's about like 15, 20 minutes of me just like yelling into my microphone about how you need to take care of your players. But
it's so important. So it's very good to cover. Very good to cover. And I'm glad that you were able to bring it up. And that was already something that I was thinking of touching on for this video recording as well. So again, I'm super glad that you were able to do that, especially because I personally haven't, safety tools have been a more recent thing that I've learned about, and I haven't really I've started like one game since learning about them, and we did a whole thing where we went over different kinds of lines and like what is things that make you uncomfortable that you do not want in the game and everything with the group that I normally play with. And I found it very, very helpful. Even though we weren't playing a horror game, it could still be a game that uncomfortable topics can come up, and setting those lines and setting those expectations were very important at the beginning. So I'm so glad that you were able to go on that rant.
and especially the safety tools are super simple to just like, hey, I'm getting a crew together we're going to do a short campaign. It'll take like, I live the dream. I get to play every week. But I've like, cool, I'm going to run a game for, 6 months whenever we can get together on the weekends. Here, I've got these arcs planned out. I've got stuff ready, and you're fighting drow, and there's a whole lot of spiders. And one of your players goes, hey, I'm not a fan of spiders. If you know that ahead of time, you don't have to rewrite your entire plot. Congratulations, you're now fighting a whole bunch of Yuan-Ti, and they're all snake people. And you can make the pivot. You're a dungeon master. It's a fantasy game. You can do whatever you want. So why are you going to limit you can do whatever you want. So let's make sure your players can experience whatever it is you create. Absolutely. With them and for them.
And especially when you're just starting the game, it is still fresh. Like everything, like you haven't gotten into anything yet. You can still make changes. It'll be okay.
And they'll never know. They'll never know that you just like changed around a couple of letters in Lolth and you've made a completely new god, and like you just kind of go with it. The players never know what's behind the door they don't take, so just move it along. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's a whole other episode on how to DM efficiently.
Oh, that would be amazing.
There's honestly, it's all sleight of hand. It's all sleight of hand behind that DM screen.
Amazing. All right. So with the kind of intro into horror games and the safety tools covered, I think we can start to get into 10 Candles now.
Yes.
And
excellent.
This game. Okay. So like I said before, I've heard of this game. I'm in like some RPG groups and such, and I've heard of it, but I haven't really looked into it until we talked. And then I got the PDF and I started to read it, and it has blown my mind. The base, like the setting for this game is that the world went dark 10 days ago. And it like no sun, no stars, no anything. The satellites have gone down, all of that. Like everything is dark. And in 5 days more, I'm sorry, I can't remember. In 5 more days, they show up.
Yes,
which
them.
Is the perfect way. Yeah, them. That is the perfect way to introduce like one of the most unsettling things ever. They show up. Like, holy shit. What are we getting into?
And that's the kind of thing we talked about before we started recording. That's the trick of horror. Horror is this fear of the unknown and not knowing if you're not truly safe. You don't know what the thing is out there. Have you watched like the first Alien movie versus Alien 3?
I have not.
Okay. If I say the alien from Aliens, do you know kind of the rough monster that I'm talking about, the xenomorph?
Yeah.
So in the first movie, you rarely see it. You never see like the full shape of it. It's always scuttling around in the shadows. You see flashes of it, but you see like the head, but you never see the whole monster until like the very end of the movie. Alien 3, we already kind of know what that monster looks like. So they have to do something different with the formula, but you know what the monster looks like. So Alien 3 is widely regarded to be a terrible horror movie. It is.
Does it go into being like an action movie? Yeah.
It's more action movie. It's like, oh, there's thousands of them. That's why they're scary. That's not the point of Alien. The point of Alien is you are trapped in the most lethal environment known to man, and something in your little safe box is trying to kill you. And
you don't know where it is. Like it is so it's unknown, in the way that, like, I can just imagine, like, the way that they are able to allude to it, and like noises and things like that just build up the tension. But actually, this is a little off topic, but also on topic at the same time. I recently watched a YouTube video about why horror games aren't good anymore. And it talks about games that get sequels, and how as the sequels go on, they get more action oriented. And even like newer horror games go more the action route than actual horror, because that's just the direction that it goes in. Like, they don't take the time to build up the suspense and make it good horror. They just go, this thing is scary, so we're just going to throw tons of it at you. And at that point, it just... I mean, you're just playing an action game where you're mowing down
It's a beat 'em
zombies.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other trick with horror games is, the trick with horror is you aren't in control. You are helpless. There are things that in a horror, because in a horror game, like, you have to like occasionally sneak past something. There is not a monster that's hunting you down. And if it finds, like, and that's also an issue with video games. Like, if the monster finds you and kills you, you're like, oh, all right, well, I'll respawn and try it again. There's not a lot of consequences for death, for failure in these things. And that's actually something I kind of want to bring up, is in the very first page of the actual book, where it talks about the world is dark, power has gone out, there are no satellites, there's nothing. This is a story, when you begin, every single person around the table knows they're going to die.
Yes.
No one makes it out of this game alive. And it's
tragic horror.
It is black horror. It is tragic horror. It is what we do when there is literally no hope. And how are we going to try and get there? Which is a hard sell for a lot of players.
I agree.
Right. It's tough. It's so good, because you have this, that's your buy-in. And that, like, hey, do you want to play a game where your character is guaranteed to die at the end, but you're going to tell the story of someone who is fighting against those odds until the end? And trying to...
Not everyone likes that.
And that's also part of the Session Zero sales pitch for this, is like, hey, your character is going to die. There is no heroic arc for you. There is nothing at the end of this 90-minute game, there is nothing but death. That's the other thing I do like about this. It's about 90 minutes long. And I don't know if you want to explain the components of this game.
Oh, yeah. So
the unique twist on it.
Oh, all right. So this game, along with being, honestly, I think just a fantastically set up horror game in general, just with, like, you know, everything going black and the, like, unknown and everything. What I find about this game that is so interesting is the fact that this game excels when you have the proper ambience. This game is called 10 Candles, and that actually works in the game as you have 10 candles that you light, and as you play the game and bad things happen and you fail rolls, candles go out. And as candles start to go out, you are running out of time, and as the last candle goes out, you are dead. Like you are going to, like, once there's one candle left, you know you're going to die, and you have to go through that, and you have to narrate it and essentially play the last scene of the character that you are playing that is now dying as the last candle goes out and you are killed.
You are extinguished. And it is the most important thing about this game when you're talking about ambiance is you play it in a room, like when you're doing character creation and you're kind of talking through this character creation. You're slowly lighting these candles, and they're just tea lights. They're just the tea lights you can buy from any general store or craft store. They're good for about 45 minutes. You have 10 of these in a circle, and as you're kind of lighting them in sequence, you're building your timeline. You're building your timer for how this game works. And then when you light the last candle, you turn off every other light in that room, and the only light is coming from those candles, and then you start playing.
And it's spooky and it's dark and terrifying.
It is spooky as all hell, and I absolutely love it.
And so, yeah, this game, like, it excels if you have the right ambiance. And I would love to, since you have run and actually played the game so far, would you like to give a quick, like, overview of setting up the game and kind of going through the character creation at first?
Yeah, 100%. So this is one of my favorite narrative systems, or for building a character, because you talked about, you've played Monster of the Week, right? So you grab your character playbook, you run through, you pick your moves, and then my favorite thing in Monster of the Week is it goes, hey, how do you know this player? Pick another player around the room. Like for the I've played the mundane, because I love the idea of the clueless vanilla human who stumbles into the solution. Just because there's so much room for comedy in there, and also heroism and tragedy, because you can be the divorced dad who stumbled into monster hunting but still has to take the kids to the baseball game.
Yes, and the oops move alone as well is just absolutely amazing.
Help, I'm going to find the next plot point for you, GM, and I'm getting myself in trouble, so my friends have to save me. It's so good. Also, you can have a sweet, sweet minivan with like holy water in the windshield wipers. But the thing with the mundane is, one of the questions it asks at the end of the playbook is, one of the other players saved you from a monster. You pick the player, they tell me what the monster was and how they saved me. And so you're building your character and sort of your relationship with these characters together. With 10 candles, you are building traits and working with your fellow players to build traits. So things you'll need for the game: 10 tea lights, a bowl that you can preferably light some stuff on fire in, 5 index cards and a Sharpie per player, and 10 identical D6. You can buy from like Chessex or anywhere, just like 10 6-sided dice, and then a unique D6 for each player, which we'll get to in a moment. And then everybody takes their stack of cards, takes the first one, and writes a vice on one and a virtue on the other. A vice being a single word adjective: lonely, confused, injured, something that will narratively cause problems, kind of like a narrative hook for that player.
And that is also open to interpretation as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can be, you want to keep it succinct. So if you're describing your character, let's say isolated. Actually, that's not a great example, because you are going to end up working together, and nobody wants the edgy loner rogue who doesn't want to play with the room. Lonely is honestly not a bad one. So you have this lonely character. You have lonely written on one index card, and on another index card you write a virtue, something that will help kind of narratively resolve problems. So you have something like resourceful or caring, or fun-loving might be another one, where it's that's again whatever word you want. Just pick 2. They don't have to work together, because what you do is, you take your virtue, you take fun-loving, for example, and you pass it over to the player on your left. And you take your vice, lonely, and you pass it to the player on your right. And each of them will take their vice and their virtue and pass them to you. So it's kind of a randomly generated character with a positive and negative trait. And then from there, the GM will kind of introduce whatever the module is. And so there's a couple of modules in the back of the book that you can get online as a PDF. Stephen Dewey is the author, and I believe it's his website you can actually order the game from.
Yes, it is.
You can get the PDF. There's a couple of modules in the back that can be, and the nice thing is it's fairly freeform. I have run a Star Trek-esque adventure in space where they were on a ship, and all of a sudden all the lights went out around them. In space, all the stars are gone. They're just floating in the black. I've also run ones that are a little more routine, a little more down to earth, metaphorically speaking. But sort of you introduce the concept. You are trying to, we'll do the one that's in the book. You have all kind of come together and you're trying to find a safe house. You're hearing on the radio before it finally died that there is a safe house a couple of miles away, or like a military outpost that still has power that people are going to try and survive whatever they are. And that's sort of your concept. And then you take your virtue and vice, combine that with sort of the setting, and build a character that would be, you build a survivor. You build someone, what they look like, what's their name, and sort of who they are as a person, a previous job, anything that would be an interesting thing for another player or yourself to kind of latch onto.
Help you get a good idea of your character.
At one point we did that. The one that I'm going to probably be referencing the most is probably my most successful game, where I was just a player in a cabin in the woods. And so when we killed all of the lights in the house, it was capital D dark. And it was one of the most surreal experience. Oh God, it was so creepy. I've never seen a group of fully grown men jump so much when there was a knock at the door. Because we had been playing for about an hour and somebody knocked at the door and everybody jumped about a foot in the air. Absolutely phenomenal.
Like the ambience, like absolute, like using that, like that's such a strong plot device.
It's so good.
Such a strong mechanic for this game because like it builds it up. And even though like, oh my God, it's just insane. I'm just still blown away by it. Like
it's annoyingly simple. It's one of those where you're looking at like it's like cooking and you look at a recipe and I'm like, there's no way only these 4 ingredients make like carbonara, or like, making a good mac and cheese doesn't take many ingredients, but once you get it, you're like, this is really good. Why did it only take like 4 things? I'm really mad about it.
How dare. And I mean, taking also some of the most simple like fear concepts, unknown, darkness, like pretty much everyone, even if they don't think about it, are afraid of those things. Even like because we have lights and access to things not being as unknown and being able to light things up, we don't think about it as much. But if you put yourself in an environment where you can only see with 10 tea lights in front of you, and you are playing a horror experience,
and the candles are shifting. It's not a steady light like a light bulb. The candles are shifting a little. And even if it's in your own house, when the shadows move, it feels like something's moving in the room with you. And it just does so much to elevate the experience.
It's them.
It's them. Where was I? Introduce the module. Make up your character.
Vice and virtue, making the character.
Yep. And then once you've kind of got a rough idea on your character, you need to find a moment where you could find hope.
Yes.
The world is falling apart around you. What is that one thing that if you find it, you'll be okay? You will have something to live for.
Mm-hmm.
And that is considered your hope moment. And this is how you get that special die that's setting off to the side next to you. That is a moment that if you have the opportunity to go and claim it, you get to use that special die, which we'll get to, which does special things once we get to sort of how scenes work.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something for you personally. That is something for you to kind of hold on to. That is not necessarily a secret for you, but that is very key to your character. And the last one, the thing that makes this sing, is the brink. It is the moment. It is the how do I describe this? No, what does he say in the book? Let's let the professional writer tell me how the brinks work. Brinks are the moment, your lowest moment. And you write, I've seen you. And then you write down what you've seen the player to your left has done. So it could be
so fantastic.
It could be something like, I have seen you lock your family in the car with them.
Ooh.
Or I have seen you stealing food. I have seen you, again, depending on if drug use is an acceptable thing, I have seen you shooting up. I have seen you stealing medicine, stealing morphine, anything like that. It is what you have seen the player to your left has done at their lowest moment. And you know what it is, and they know what you've seen them do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, up to this point, the players next to the GM have just skipped over the GM. The GM doesn't get a vice, a virtue, a character. But the brinks, they get. So the player to the GM's right writes down, I have seen them. And this is the first time that we get any indication of what they can do. Whatever they are. It could be, I have seen them walk through walls. I've seen them howling at the moon. I have seen them shed their skin and look like us. And the GM writes down a brink of their own for the player to the left of them. That's, they have seen you do something. Depending on what kind of they you end up developing with this input from another player, you could have them have some leverage over one of the characters. Or they are, maybe, for example, they're a science experiment and the player to the left of the GM worked in the lab where they got out and is responsible for this.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. You have, the GM gets their claws in one player, but another player gets to put limits and a guidepost as to what they can do.
And a big thing as well, as the player is saying what they can do, is you can't list any sort of weakness.
Nope.
And the best part as well with this game and how it brings itself, it includes the ambiance and stuff even more, is the only thing these things are weak to or scared of is light. Mm-hmm. That is the only way to deter them and to keep them away from you. So as things start to go bad and you lose light, it works in the game as well. Exactly, yes. It's amazing. But it's some of my favorite collaborative character creation that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Just working with others and having them, because it's like getting random characters and then making them work for you and the type of game that you're playing. Mm-hmm. Because your game could go in different directions and you want to set kind of expectations. If you're going for something rooted in space, that's going to be a completely different situation and a different game than something that is set in a dark cabin. Mm-hmm. Completely different games. And I just love how it says to be open and leave it up for interpretation, because there's so many different opportunities and so many different things that could happen with just the character creation alone that'll make the game amazing.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things, as you're kind of reading through it, yes, the players to the left and right of the GM have a little more sway on the sort of the direction of them, whatever the entities are that you're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a game that, if with the right group, this is a little like mid-tier. It's a little advanced for some basic players, because a lot of folks, again, are exposed to Dungeons and Dragons, where it's like, I roll a d20 and add what to it, and I want to punch the monster. If you are punching the monster in this game, things may have gone wrong.
You die.
You'll probably die. But there are definitely opportunities for, like, because this is so freeform and so narratively juicy. We had, at that particular cabin game, it was a bachelor party, because the bachelor, the groom was definitely a big horror fan and he wanted to play. And some of his groomsmen had never played an RPG or even a horror game before. And they pulled out some of the most unsettling things, because it's my favorite thing with new players. They don't know where the fences are. They are people, you put down a piece of paper in front of them and go, draw me a picture. And they don't have any classical training. They just create stuff, and it's so flexible. The system is flexible enough that it can bend with those. As a GM, you have a lot to juggle to keep all of these balls in the air and make sure that everyone is getting an opportunity to shine, because these characters feel a little flimsy. But they're only supposed to live 90 minutes. You're not going to pour 4 pages of backstory into this character who's not going to make it, who's not going to live to see the end of Avatar 2. Like, if there's... Sorry, them's the breaks, guys. Like, that's but you have this flexibility in making this character, and this is a really good time to play around with age and gender a little bit, because you're living in this skin for just a little while, and you can do some really interesting storytelling with that. Having a, like, punk 18-year-old meeting up with a bunch of, like, Army Reserve guys, and it's this haphazard group of people that have been thrown together by fate, and they're all just trying to survive.
Oh,
so after you build, you have all of these stacks, you have a decent idea of who your character is, you have your character concept on one card, you keep that to your side just as a little reminder. And then you have your vice, your virtue, your moment, and your brink. And you can stack those in any order on your card. Your brink just goes at the bottom, because if that card goes away, you are at your wit's end. That is basically your last hit point. Once everyone has a moment to kind of think about it, think about the scene, you light the last candle. Turn off all of the lights. And the GM, on their phone, on a recording device, has each person record a final message to whoever, loved one, family, really anyone that they feel they would send a message to. It doesn't have to be long, but you pass your phone around the table, everyone records, you stop the recording, and the game starts. And the way every single scene starts is, as a group, you all recite the phrase, "We know this to be true. The world is dark." And then, starting to the left of the GM, each player recites a truth. It is a single sentence, fairly simple sentence, about the world, the scene, what's happening. So it could be, you've all piggybacked on a couple of Humvees, you're all trying to make your way out to this base camp. And it can be something like, we've scavenged 2 Humvees. That is the first player's truth. The second player, there's only enough gas to get us halfway there. Third player, it's starting to snow. And you go around person by person naming truths. They can be positive or negative. But again, the intent is to make an interesting story, because you could say, we make it there safely. And that's fine. But what does that do for the horror? What does that do for the suspense? Where does that drive the story?
Exactly. And the DM also gets a turn with the truths as well.
Exactly.
Which means they can put in some not great things, such as your flashlights are running low.
Mm.
You're running out of light. You're going like it's dangerous. Something is chasing you.
There's a tree in the road, and there's creaking sounds in the woods around you. That's technically two things, but you're as the GM, because you also get a say in it, and you say one truth for each lit candle around the table.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of those 10 truths, as a group, you all say, "And we are alive." And you will repeat this every time you start a new scene. And every time when you put out a candle, you start a new scene and you recite the truths again. You recite different truths. You'll only recite 9 the second time. And you will work your way down fewer and fewer truths, always beginning with, "We know this to be true, the world is dark," and ending with, "And we are alive." Every single time. And it really adds this sort of culty vibe to the whole thing that is 100% what you want in a dark and spooky cabin or a basement or just a very dark, quiet space.
Absolutely. And I think it increases like buy-in as well, because everyone needs to participate in it. Everyone, like the "we are alive," that's everyone saying it at once.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's manifesting it. It's like this is the final truth in this scene. In every single scene, the final truth is "we are alive," except the last one. But we'll get to that.
Cool. And one of my favorite things as well about how this game is introduced is it starts out with saying, your character is going to die. Like we said earlier, your character is going to die. But as you are playing, you need to have hope that your character will survive. And play your character as they are. Like, your character doesn't know they're going to die. Their character doesn't know this is the end of the road. They think there could be hope, and you have to play them like that until they meet their end. Yeah. Exactly. Until they go to the brink or go to their end and they just lose hope. Everything just gets sucked from them as they go through this treacherous journey. And the whole thing that's amazing is you are living the last moments of this group's life. And it's haunting. Yeah. It plays really, and again, you know that a character is it's that dramatic irony of we know when we're watching Star Wars, we know what characters are going to die. There are characters in the prequel trilogy that don't make it. We know they die in Revenge of the Sith. We know every single Jedi until they start retconning more Jedi. We know they're all not going to make it. It's going to be messy. And we know that, and we understand that. And that that makes them maybe more heroic. That how do they go out? What story can they tell with their limited time left? And it makes you value those moments more. Because in the next 30 minutes when that last candle goes out, that's it. That is how this person goes. And you will get to narrate those moments and make them however impactful you want them to. Exactly. Do they go out with a bang? Do they go out heroically? Or do they just give up? Which, especially that's the biggest reason why those safety tools are important, because this is some heavy, you may have to believe this out. This is some heavy shit. This is the kind of stuff that you need to make sure that you're ready to deal with. And a lot of times people go into it and realize they're not ready for it, and they got to dip because you are immersed in it. Unlike a horror movie where you can look at the screen and be like, "Don't go in the creepy basement, lady. You're gonna die." You're the one in the creepy basement, and you might not be able to, you're in that skin, and it's so hard to separate that sometimes. And it's okay to leave if you need to.
Totally okay to leave. And if your GM doesn't set up safety tools and you're playing a horror game, you need to find a new GM.
Okay, so like that, like this is just like character creation and just like how the game works in the setting for it, and it's mind blowing.
Yeah, that's the first 15 minutes of the game.
That's the first 15 minutes. But in the game as well, there are dice mechanics. As you mentioned earlier, that you need dice in the game, and part of those mechanics are hope dice, but there's also a pool of dice of 10 dice to be specific. And that is what you use during the game to overcome complications. And like even chances of fate and like who can gain narrative control of what happens, which I think is very, very interesting in this game.
And that's another thing that I really like about it. And having a more experienced crew of players, at least one or two, to help lead the GM along with that sense of narrative control. Because winning a die roll, for how the dice rolls work, you are all you're trying to find something. You're continuing an adventure. You're trying to get to a location. You have a destination in mind, and there are struggles. There is adversity. There are conflicts. The way conflict rolls work is you will take one die per lit candle and just roll them. And if you have any sixes, success, great. You succeed. Cool. Any ones that are rolled, the GM claims and just holds on to them for a little bit. It's a little gift. It's a little present. It's a little treat for me.
I will eat them.
I will. I mean, you could. You're going to go through a lot of dice in this game if you keep chewing on them. But if you roll and you get no sixes, you fail the scene. And a candle goes out. That is like the number one way that candles will go out in this game, is if you make a conflict roll and you fail. And you will, so say for instance, you pull over you're trying to find, you said the flashlight batteries are dying. Pull over to a gas station. Someone's trying to refill the car that you're driving, refill the bus. And someone's going to go into the convenience store to look for batteries. That would be a conflict roll because there's potential for things to go wrong. And this game also teaches you when to ask for a dice roll more than any other game that I've played. When do you ask for a dice roll? Because there need to be stakes. There needs to be something that can go wrong if you're doing this.
Absolutely.
So walking into a dark, abandoned convenience store when the world is ending, there's risk there. So you'd ask for a conflict roll to go look for these batteries. And if they roll 1, 6, and a couple of 4s, or a couple of 1s, you get the 1s, they get their 6. They retain narrative control. They get to tell you what they find. The player does. And the GM just holds on to those. But if it gets to the point where eventually, because the GM takes all those 1s, eventually you will reach a point where there's not enough dice to roll 6s on. And you will fail. And then the GM, I believe, yes, the GM will eventually win, or you won't be able to roll 6. The GM will narrate your failure and put out a candle, and then you move on to the next scene. So in your second scene, there are 9 lit candles. You start with 9 dice, and the GM has 1. So on your conflict rolls in the second scene, you're rolling 9 dice, but the GM is rolling their die. And if they roll more 6s than you succeed, but the GM tells you the results of your success. They have the narrative. And so they are telling you, yes, you succeeded in finding batteries, but there's something icky and there's slime on these batteries for some reason. These look like they've been eaten by something and regurgitated. So there might be a monster in this convenience store with you. And sort of adding more stakes to that. Now, as a player, you can succeed, but if the GM has narration rights, you, as a player, can extinguish a candle intentionally and seize the narrative back, but you cost everyone a scene and you lose time.
Which is so dangerous.
Because on your next roll, you're down a candle, you're down a die, and the GM keeps rolling. And as you continue to put out candles, the GM gets more and more and more dice to roll against you. So you might succeed in what you're doing, but eventually those odds at the very beginning where you are just... It's so funny to watch the opening scene. Very much like a horror movie. Everyone's having some laughs. It's a little serious, but everyone's like, oh, the world's really dark. Haha, I guess I'm glad I didn't invest in solar power. And then about halfway through, you're on even footing with the GM, and whoever gets more sixes tells which way this doomed boat is going to sail.
Mm-hmm.
And you're wrestling for the narrative control like it's a knife.
And things keep going wrong, because as the GM gets more power, they start to get more power as well and start coming out more. Because one of my favorite parts when I started to read the GM section of the book was, they don't have to show up within the first part of the game. They don't have to show up. They're there. They know. Like, everyone knows they're there. Everyone knows they're looking and lurking and waiting. They don't have to show up until later when things start to get bad and you are at the end of your rope. And it is amazing. Another thing, though, that you can do, I don't believe you can do this on failures, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you succeed and you roll a bunch of ones, you can choose to burn a trait.
Correct. This is why you need the fireproof bowl in the middle of the table.
Yes, exactly.
And that is if you roll any time there is at least a 1 in your pile of dice. So this happened at that particular cabin, at that particular bachelor party. First roll of the game, 6 1s.
Oh my goodness.
And so we were about to give 6 dice to the GM and be down to 4 in the very opening scene. And so the player who rolled took his virtue, his top trait, which I think was like gallows humor or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you burn it. You literally burn the index card. Dunk it in your tea light, catch it on fire, put it in the bowl, and you get this. That allows you to re-roll any and all ones in your pile. Mm-hmm. Which is fantastic for getting you out of those positions, but it basically costs you a hit point. It costs you a reroll later on. And narratively, how does, like, for instance, the gallows humor, how does that come into play with how does that narratively push forward your success?
Yeah.
And so it was something like, oh, in the movies, they never check under the body. And he like rolled the body over and found something under there that he was looking for.
That's amazing.
and that's where like getting a rough idea on your character and being willing to just color in spaces quickly as other players are making choices is really good. So yeah, you can burn your traits to reroll. But remember that moment that we were chatting about earlier? Mm-hmm. That one is one you don't want to burn unless you absolutely have to. Mm-hmm. Because narratively, that is the thing that if you do it, you'll have something to live for. You'll have a reason to keep fighting. You find your hope for that. And the same character with the gallows humor was looking for his character's fiance. And we were driving to this encampment, and we came across a long line of dead cars. And he went, hey, I see my fiance's car. I want to go look for her, and I want to seize my moment. And that was the top card on his pile. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I want to find my fiance. I want to look for her, and I want to see if she's alive. And so it's like any other conflict roll. You grab the dice, you roll, and you see if you succeed. If you succeed, you get to use that special little die. And for this one, I had to go on Amazon and search, and I found glow-in-the-dark dice. which were like perfect for it.
Amazing.
And so those were the hope dice. A hope dice succeeds on a 5 or a 6, so you've literally doubled your chances of success.
Mm-hmm.
And the GM can never take it away from you.
Really?
So you just have this. You have this little, and I fought so hard to find these glow in the dark dice because it's just this little green speck sitting next to you. It's the only source of light other than those candles, and it keeps going when the candles go out. And it is narratively super juicy. And that die,
at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, and that die just kept working for us. And every time he had to make a roll, that hope die saved us more times than not.
That's amazing. Oh gosh.
But if he had failed that roll, he would have lost that hope forever.
Mm-hmm.
He has no other opportunity to claim it. If he had found his fiance's car and found her in it, eaten, dead, skeletonized, whatever they get to do in this particular game, that's it. He can still burn it. He can burn that hope for a reroll, but he can never get the hope die once he makes that roll for it.
And it's going to be so upsetting.
And it's so... And especially like as the GM, you get to describe it. And you get to describe what they run across or what they find when they fail that hope. And this makes me sound like an absolute crazy person, but it's so good when everyone buys into it. The amount of buy-in that you get in this game, if everyone is 100% on board, you get absolute magic.
And it just pushes it forward even more. And it just that's the times where you feel like you lose hope. Even though nothing happened to you yourself as a person, you just listened and heard what happened and felt what happened to your character. And
or not even your character, just your friend's character. And your buddy comes back to the convoy and he's just quiet. He is... and he I think he burned, he would burn traits, but he lost that light and lost that spark and was just a little more, it was a little dead inside when he, when you lose those moments. And it's so, it gives little bits of success and failure along the way. And when you succeed on a hope die, it is a hopeful moment for everyone else at the table.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and that even more is a good roleplay moment and makes even sense with pushing you closer to the brink.
Mm-hmm.
What is the worst thing, and what are you capable of when everything
when the chips are down, when the shit hits the fan, what is your character going to do? And the gameplay will continue sort of in that fashion as everyone is trying to achieve their goals. It's getting closer and closer to the objective, whatever that destination is. And they can make it to the destination, depending on how their druids go. They can make it halfway there. They can get to the destination and then the destination is destroyed. You can do so many things with it. And I've had games that are contained to a single starship. I've had games that are a cabin. I've had games that are you're crossing chunks of the country because they keep trying to get from safe house to safe house to safe house, and they're burning days instead of hours or minutes. It's remarkably flexible in that way.
Absolutely. And just as well as because there is a timer, and let's say you get to the safe house, even if you lock the door and feel like you're safe, it could be something else is in here with you.
They're already on the inside, because at that point you might not know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's another great horror movie is The Thing. It looks like us. It just blends in, and you have no idea what it is. And how do you? The Thing is especially paranoia-inducing, and is an absolute classic. But you have again that level of you are never safe. You think you are, but there is always something around the next bend. And as you are, so yeah, I'm trying to think of what.
I know using the brinks is a mechanic as well, and it's
Yes.
similar to using the traits.
Yes.
However, you can, isn't it? You can use a brink for a roll, and if it succeeds,
everything.
Oh yes, and if you succeed, you keep it, but if it fails, you burn it.
And I was mistaken. There is one way to lose your hope die, and is if you fail on a brink reroll. You burn it, you immediately lose a candle. And then you lose your hope die. And that's why the brink is at the bottom, because that is the very last thing. And that is your character basically losing everything.
It's endgame.
It is. And usually that makes it to about that's about the 9th or 10th candle, where where there is one truth spoken. But again, the important thing at the beginning and end of every single one of those, we know this to be true. The world is dark, and we are alive. And that sense of unification at the end is so good, because as the characters die, in the last scene, there is one die floating around the table as the end has come. And when you roll, and if you fail, that is it. That is how your character dies when they fail that next roll. So what are they going to do to make that death important? Or cowardly? Who is this person in their final moments? And you get to follow this arc, this spiraling staircase down into what this person does when there is absolutely nothing left. And, I had a character who, in that particular bachelor party game, turned coward, jumped in the car, and drove off, like surrounded by them, drove off into the night. And there was a crunch, like the car crashed, you heard a scream, and that was it. That's the end of my character. Done. On to the next player.
And you, as well, in this game that I really like, is everyone gets narrative control over how their character dies.
Their death. You aren't told rocks fall and everybody dies. You get to decide how your character spends their last seconds. And again, can be tragic, can be kind of heroic, can be that doomed, like, cowboy last stand where he just goes out and tries to be a distraction for the rest of the group, so they might be able to, like, hide somewhere or live a couple of minutes longer. Or, if it just what happens in that moment. And again, everyone dies. So the worst part, and this is definitely going to get a content warning. The guy who found his fiance at the beginning of that session, she was alive at the end, and he had to decide what to do with that. And so he had to make a really, really hard choice. And he had a gun with one bullet left, and he had to make that choice. And so he chose her. And then he was basically ripped apart by whatever they were at the end when they came for him. And it was, again, this was the guy who had never played a role-playing game before. And he got tears out of people around the table. That
is amazing.
It's so good. And it's, if you lean into a little bit of the twisted, you get moments that you could not get that kind of impact and weight in almost any other game. I have yet to find a game that carries that kind of emotional impact. But that's also because I haven't played Alice is Missing. I just have it on my shelf.
Oh my god, I want to play it so bad.
It's an aspirational game and I want it. That's another episode.
I mean, if you're ever looking for someone to play, I'm free.
Noted. We'll make that happen. That one you can actually play remotely really easily.
Yes. Yeah, actually, I mean, like, I think I mean, we've kind of covered the entire game. Like it is an adventure of the last moments of this group's life as they fight, not even fight, maybe even coward and try and survive against these strange things that they can't even see or know how to stop. And you all die at the end, and there's no way of stopping it. And the one kind of relief that you do get is the way that your character goes. You can control that, and that's really it.
It's very much like I know we said we were gonna steer away from D&D games, but the Calamity miniseries from Critical Role.
I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard really good things.
That's the sort of arc where, like, at the end, the Age of Arcanum is going to come crashing down around these people, and you are latched onto every word that they say.
And you make everything last. Not last, but you make every moment the most. Like, you make sure that, like, this is all that I get. So I'm going to make sure to make the most of it and to make
I want this to be the most, like, every sentence could be your last, so you make them all count. And it is so good. Oh, it's so good. I'm just looping at this point because it's now you make me want to play it.
That's sometimes how it is. It's like, again, there's sometimes when I read a game and I look into a game and I just get into a loop of, like, this is amazing. It does what you want. That's my favorite thing about getting into different RPGs is finding games that do exactly what you want. And being able to just accomplish it and set the vibes right. Because if you're playing a horror game, you want characters that are normal people. They can't fight back, and when they do, it's out of desperation and fear and survival, versus playing in a game like D&D where you get so many abilities and powers and things to counteract those things. Horror just doesn't work quite the same.
You have too much agency in a lot of those games. You have even Monster of the Week. Like, Monster of the Week constrains you because it's like, I can kick ass, I can run away, what do I have? And unless you're one of the combat heavy subclass, like, you have one of the more combat heavy moves, you are you're restraining your opportunities to a framework, and the GM is they're like, cool, I want to kick ass, and it's like, all right, here's sort of the restrictions on that. And the restriction drives creativity and drives more engagement to it. And, like, because you have sort of a limited field of options, and you're watching your options get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer as this last stand approaches, that tension gets higher and higher and higher, because you're like, I know we're not going to get out of this, but I want this character to survive just a minute longer. Give me another 60 seconds with this guy, with this friend, before ultimately they are just taken away. The last candle goes out. The GM says the world is dark. We know this to be true. The world is dark. And they take out their phone. And I forgot the most important, the denouement, the like aftercare, maybe? The aftermath. And they play the recordings from at the beginning of the session.
I was wondering if that's how it was used, because that would probably make me cry.
It's because in that bachelor party example, the guy who just had to put his wife out of her misery. Want to know what his message was at the beginning of the game? It was a voicemail to his wife saying, "I'm coming to get you, baby. We're gonna get through this. I'm going to take care of you." And it was like, you immediately have that juxtaposition of all of this hope and how it ended. It's that first line, last line thing. And oh God, there were tears. There were so many tears when that ended.
Oh my God, I bet.
And it's
I want to cry. Like, oh my God.
It's, again, not a game for children. Be ready for some heavy shit. But it is narratively, if you can find a group that will buy in and work with it, because the system is so open, but the core concept is so strong, there is such a through line through this where you watch that turn. It's so good. It's like watching like a heist movie or a superhero movie. Like, you know how it's going to end. You always know how the superhero movies end. They haven't surprised us with a single one yet. But you're still going to go play it. You're still going to go watch it because the trip there is worth it.
Exactly.
The voicemails at the end are in the dark.
Especially in the dark.
Yeah, in a pitch dark space.
That is an emotional roller coaster. Like, absolutely. Especially because, like you mentioned earlier, at the beginning, it can, like, yeah, there's some seriousness there, but, like, people are kind of having fun and can be joking around, like, oh, yeah, we're just starting this, like, we're having fun. And then everything starts going bad, and as it progresses, worse and worse and worse until the end where you die, and then you listen to at the beginning when you had hope ago. And you had no idea what would happen.
And it's such a wonderful, like, little 90-minute adventure in and out. And when, like, a whole cabin full of dudes, including like a bunch of ex-military dudes, all of the lights were on when we were done with that game for about like, we went to bed and left lights on in the house that we were staying in because we were like, no, I'm good. I've spent too much time in the dark. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Not letting them in. Not letting them in.
No, they can stay away. Thank you very much.
But, like, and that's the thing with horror as well, is just, like, it lasting. Like, it being in your head and thinking about it and just, like, dwelling, like, how could things have been different?
And even just, like, the endings, the super tragic endings, because that's honestly what I remember the most from most of my games is how things ended. And how the character, like, that beginning and end, the start of the sentence and the end of the sentence, and it just narratively, everything got tied up really nicely. And the endings were the things that, again, everyone remembers the character. You didn't know much about them, but you know the important part. You know the last 5 days of their life. And you can take that and do with that whatever you want. But it's just so, oh God, it's so good. I'm just going to keep saying it's so good.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, gosh, it makes me want to play so bad. And we were talking about this a little bit before we started to record. You have played this strictly in person, and I think that is absolutely the best way to play it, because online, sadly, because the ambience is, like, so important, you can't get too close to how it would feel.
Yeah,
doing online play, and it's very unfortunate.
It's so primal. It's like you're kind of thrown back to, like, you are Neanderthals, you are proto-humans gathered around a fire to keep out the dark. And with computers, with all the screens, with all these steady light sources around us that we surround ourselves with, even here in my apartment. I'm on a fairly unlit little part of my complex, but it's still, I can't get the room as dark as I would want to. And that's the downside of playing it in a dark cabin in the middle of the woods, is I had the best thing ever, and now I'm going to compare literally everything to that. So I've spoiled that for myself. But having a dark space, having a quiet dark space is hard for a lot of folks, because not everyone has the privilege of having a separate room that they can throw curtains and blankets up and make this very small dark space and play. I have seen a few games played remotely of it, though. And one of the things that we were chatting about again before we started recording was having each player have 2 candles in front of them, and that being their light source. If you're playing in Discord with a video chat up, or even just like with a voice chat, and just having everything be dark and it's all communicated through voices in the dark, and then these two candles in front of you, and the GM just telling you, put out a candle, and then beginning the cycle anew. I again have not tried it. This is definitely a game that if you can play in person, I strongly recommend it, because you will never have another game experience like this one, good or bad. I've had bad games of this where it doesn't quite land, which is I had a couple of people that were interested in who really liked horror movies and wanted to try RPGs, and it wasn't the right group. It didn't quite land. And that's the biggest weakness of this game, is getting the right people to play, getting a group of players that work well together and work well with your GM. And there is that level of trust and comfort.
Absolutely. And works well in an open narrative game, because that's a big part of this as well, is the GM does not have full narrative control of everything. It's up to the players a lot of the time. I mean, the whole the truths part, you can't really have too much planned for the game, because the players can add any truths they want to the game and change the world and change the outcome and what they can get and find and have and encounter.
Absolutely. And that's part of where, even when you're starting, you because like the rough Star Trek-ish game that I ended up running was, I picked Star Trek or like a starship because everyone at my table was a Star Trek nerd. The person whose house we were playing at, their cat is named Dax, after Ezri Dax from Deep Space Nine. Or not, well, both Daxes from Deep Space Nine, but there's and so we grabbed onto that as a point of comfort, and we don't have to explain all this narrative. We don't have to do pages and pages of like understanding how a military base works or something like that. We went, cool, starship, here are the main components. Everyone kind of picked it. And one of the things they did was, like, when they were making their characters, they picked a department. We had an officer, really, we had an engineer, and it was just it was the narrative that was our jumping on point, and it made them feel a little more comfortable in that space. And that also kind of worked with the horror element, because all of a sudden their starship is dead in space and it is dark outside and you cannot see a thing. So what do you do with that?
Like, and a big part of that is just like those players were very comfortable with that setting. Right. And so, and familiar enough with it that they could, just from knowing like what you were basing it on and everything,
and rough tropes and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that also gives you the opportunity as the GM to start subverting those tropes, and having like, and also, again, because you have to be narratively flexible, you want it to be an environment that everyone can participate in, including you, because you don't know what the monsters do until your player hands you a card that says, this is what I have seen this monster do. And you're like, cool, that's their main mechanic. Like, thinking of it like any other monster, that's their main mechanic. That's the main thing they do. Dragons breathe fire and they spread through water. And that's the thing that we're doing. So that's what we're going with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it really forces you to think on your feet and really tests your understanding of what makes things scary.
Yeah, and I think as well with like the character creation and the stuff, and being able to put input on what they do, makes every experience unique, because everyone's going to come, even if you play with the same group. I think if you play it 2 times, both games are going to be completely different. Correct. Because the creatures are going to work differently depending on what concept people come up with. The characters are going to work completely different. You're going to approach the game different. You're going to have different characters that have different brinks and virtues and vices and all of that, and it's going to always be a different experience.
And you can't force in any direction. You can't force a narrative thing. And what my favorite part about playing other RPGs, and one of the reasons that when I saw your posting, I went, yo, I want on, let's do this, is my favorite thing is seeing what in this game I can steal and put somewhere else. Because that's why I have 2 bookshelves completely chock full of other systems, because I'm like, well, Blades in the Dark has some really cool stuff. I'm gonna steal this and I'm gonna put it over in this game.
Yeah, it's like just reading RPG books in general. I find great like GM advice, great advice about like playing games in general, amazing settings and mechanics and creatures and characters and tropes and all these, just so many ideas, because they're made by different people, and people have all these different and unique and interesting ideas, and so reading through them is always such a journey.
And the thing that this game has really driven for me is, like, again, with that collaborative narrative storytelling and being willing and comfortable to go, hey, player character in another campaign, you tell me what you know about this thing. And trusting my group and trusting the player themselves to come up with something narratively interesting. Because and that's a hard thing for a lot of groups, is to just you're handing over complete control to the player for 3 minutes, and they can throw some stuff in there that will completely derail anything you had planned, or they'll come up with something unbelievably clever and creative that you would never have thought of. Because again,
favorite moments.
People are coming from all these disparate, these various backgrounds. Everyone is something different. And by handing over the reins and trusting your players enough to hand over narrative control for a couple of sentences and what their character does, and they're like, oh, I walk over and I flip the table. Well, I didn't have a table on my battle map a second ago, but I guess there was one here, and now it's over here. Great, cool. There's a table in the corner. How am I going to use the fact that this table is gone, and giving the choices that the players make, giving them more agency, and making them literally shaping the world around them in that way, and leaning into the yes and or no but. You never say yes or no. There is always an and always a but.
And I actually I've always heard the yes and thing, but it's been recent that I've heard the no but, which I think is very important, because it's okay to say no. You just have to add something on. Like it has to continue the narrative and what is happening. It can't just stop it.
Right. How do you failed. How do I make this failure interesting and push the story forward? You failed to start the truck. Like, you failed to, the truck engine died. You failed to start the truck. So what is that? And no, you failed, but this caused something else to happen. You hear motorcycles in the distance. You hear something else. There is always, it adds something new, and the failures are significant. They aren't just failures. And this is something that Monster of the Week does really well, is talking about failing forward. Because when you fail, you get experience, and you don't just want to be like, well, I failed to pick the lock. Well, someone else is going to come and try and do it. It's like, no, you failed and the door is jammed. Like you've jammed the door shut. Your only option is to kick it down. Or no, but you hear somebody moving inside and someone on the inside of the door is going to open it. You have additional narrative baked into those successes and failures. And like I said earlier, these are dice rolls that could be life or death.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
never stopping the narrative.
No, you gotta keep that thing going, because you are also timed. I probably absolutely should have mentioned this earlier on. If a candle goes out for any reason, the scene is over. If you bump the table and a candle goes out, scene is over. You find a sentence to end it, and then you start fresh. If a candle just burns out after they're good for like, I think 30 to 45 minutes. If it burns down to nothing and goes out, scene is over. And when you're lighting them, you light the first 3 in a group. And then you do more character creation. And then once you start planning your moments, you light the next 3. And then when you plan your brinks, you light the next 3. And when you make your stacks, you turn off the lights, light the last candle, and the game starts. And that there is such a ritualistic flow to it, and that really helps the buy-in. and everyone is like if you have a lighter, you can use the lighter on all of them. But if you have a single match, you have each player light a candle, and everyone participates in signing their own deaths.
And it starts the buy-in so early as well, because like usually sessions can sometimes like start very abruptly. Like if you're starting a game, it can like, oh, you were talking and then okay, we have to start. Like that, like obviously you are starting at a certain point, but you're going through a process of making your characters and slowly lighting those candles and slowly getting ready for something you don't even know you're ready for. Like
you're not jumping in like, all right, when last we left our intrepid heroes. It doesn't start like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Exactly.
And it's so good. But yeah, I feel like I've done an awful lot of talking. And what questions do you have as someone who has read through most of the book and has just additional questions about it?
I think for me, and I don't mind you talking more, especially because you are more knowledgeable of this game. So I appreciate being able to hear someone talk about it and explain it and talk about their experience. Always amazing. So questions from the base game itself, I don't have too many because I actually really appreciate how well written the like book is. Like even through reading it, I didn't really have questions about rules or specific things like that. One thing that I would love to ask, though, a few things I would love to ask, but first one is when it came to them, in the book it said that, oh, you could either keep it like a complete mystery the entire time, or it could actually be part of your journey to find out more. With the games that you have played, what approach did you take with them more?
So as a GM, when I'm running games, and this is something I've learned from playing like Stars Without Number and other games, you're not, and which helps in this game, you're not writing a screenplay. You're not writing a book. You build this faction. You know who the enemy is, and you know what they're trying to do. It could be a single entity, it could be a group of entities, it could be a hive mind. What is this thing trying to do? And so having kind of like this, when I ran the science fiction style game, the players were trying to figure out why their ship was dead in space. Why, like, they were trying to figure out what has gone on, because they were going at it from like that science fiction, that scientific point of view. And so they're attacking to try and figure out, they're trying to attack the problem like a Starfleet crew. Exactly. Yeah. Which was great because Starfleet as this utopian society, Jean-Luc Picard as this pinnacle of what humans can be, watching that get dashed upon the rocks of reality was so good, because that's a Star Trek story we'll never ever get to see, really. We're getting some of that in Star Wars Andor, but that's a Misspent Youth podcast. But that one was like, okay, they said the monsters in the water. And I went, cool, what the hell do I do with this? I'm like, you're on a starship. How does this work in a starship? And figuring out what the monster was trying to do makes it really easy to, when the players are doing things, where's the monster going to be? The monster is trying to, like, it's in the water. Cool, this thing exists at low-ish temperatures. And I realized after the game, I basically stole the Doctor Who plot from the waters of Mars, or Water on Mars, a little bit. But that's okay. None of them had seen Doctor Who. It's cool. They thought it was brilliant. That's another trick. Steal from your favorite movies and TV shows that your players haven't seen.
Yes.
But so we had that one. It was like, okay, what are they trying to do? The monster's going to be in the engine core, trying to like cool things down and make everything dark and quiet. And then it's snuffing out sources of heat throughout the ship. And so once you turn off central heating, and everyone else was in like cryosleep or whatever sci-fi thing that the players had woken up from, but they hadn't. The players are now the warmest bodies on the ship. They're the warmest thing, and that's what the monster is after. And that was a little more of an instinctive monster. And the players were like were naturally pitted up against it because they're trying to restart the ship and go home, and they are running directly counter against what the monsters want. The monster wants it to be cold, like just cold and dead as the outside of as space outside. And the players are like, well, we need heat, and you have that conflict. Whereas in like the particular Bachelor Party game, these were just an experiment that had broken loose and was running around just doing sort of more natural things. It was individual monsters from the dark that were, sensitive to light. So everywhere they go, they're putting out light sources. They're chewing on electricity. Because that's just how the monster kind of works. And the players weren't trying to solve the problem. They're trying to survive through it and trying to stay out of the way, because these monsters were effectively a natural disaster. So you can't stop an avalanche. You just get the hell out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it gets more survival at that point, like especially versus a sci-fi game.
But then at that point, where do you go when the avalanche is everywhere? And that's sort of how the game ended, was everything was overrun and they were just trying to sneak from place to place to place. And they had no idea if there were other survivors. They my character kept carrying the radio and trying to raise anybody, talk to anybody, which was putting the party at risk, because every time I turned on the radio, the monsters would basically feel it and come chase us down. And so the monster can be kind of whatever fits narratively with what the players are doing. And again, the players don't know what this monster can and get. The only person who knows what the monsters can do is the player who wrote the Brink. So when do you show that that they can, whatever they touch corrodes and rusts away? When do you show that to the players?
Yeah, because that's also a thing as well. I don't know if we mentioned during the Brink, like when you're making the Brink cards in your game, you don't tell other people. No one else sees those cards except for you and the person who gets them.
Yeah. And it's so good because you have a secret. And so some of the best times are when like a Brink was a guy in the Star Trek game. It was this couple who was having they were romantically involved, but it was under wraps. And it's like, I've seen you, the two of them were romantically involved. And one of them wrote, I've seen you with another crew member. And that was the Brink. And that was the thing that caused a shout, like an in-character shouting match, because the world is ending around them. And I can't, I saw you with her in her bunk. Why? I don't trust you. And it's so human. And in that case, so alien, but the emotions that you can put in those Brinks and just sprinkle them around. They are the bottom layer of a dessert. And there's just always something. It's like a graham cracker crust on a cheesecake. I used to work in a kitchen, so food analogies are very common in my world. But it's like that there's a little bit of crunch, and that's there's just a little bit of extra texture and chew in there that you just can't, that you don't really get other places, because you don't have 45 sessions of D&D to build up this super deep, dark backstory. No, again, you have 90 minutes. We're getting in and we're getting out, and we're seeing what stories we can tell in that time frame.
And it's just such a good way to start conflict between people with it's a good way to introduce the conflict without unnaturally starting it or just based on things that happen in the game. These are already established conflicts that could come up at any time, and it doesn't even matter if it comes up in the story. It could just mean the person is at their breaking point and they're upset and they don't trust someone, and they just they need to express it to the rest of the group, and then that starts its own like snowball effect, and everything just goes crazy.
Yeah. And speaking of like characters fighting, you don't have to stay as a group. Because of it's shot again, it's more filmed like a horror movie where you're jumping back and forth. And so you're like, hey, this character makes a conflict roll. We resolve that conflict roll. Great, they succeeded. What's Billy doing over there off in the corner by himself? What are you up to? What are you trying to do? Oh, that sounds like it deserves a roll. Billy's trying to hotwire a van so he can have his own, like, we're a little cramped in this car, so he's trying to hotwire a van. But Billy didn't check the back seat of the van, and he failed his conflict roll. So we're going to find out who's in the back. It might not even be them. It just might be a guy sleeping in the back of his own van, and you're trying to hotwire and steal it, because the other threats don't have to be them.
Exactly. Actually, that is a question I have. You can very quickly finish your sentence, but I do have a question about like using NPCs and such in this game.
I mean, that's really it. Like you can your threat isn't just the them. You can see more of how your particular world is falling apart and what kind of horror story you're trying to tell. I believe that's the end of my sentence.
Okay. Yeah. So sorry. I was just like, oh shit. Yeah.
No, you're good.
That's something I wanted to bring up. Yeah. NPCs. So obviously like NPCs come up in role-playing games all the time. Because you want to populate the world. But when it is like world ending and such, how do you utilize NPCs in a efficient and very much narratively storytelling way for the kind of game that you're trying to play? If you're playing a horror game, being alone is more terrifying than having other people around. But if other people are causing issues and are involved in conflicts that could put the group that is playing in trouble, or could even get threatened themselves, like what have you either done or experienced with NPCs in your games, and if at all?
So for like because there is that isolationist horror. There is the terror of it is just the five of us in this cabin. It is we are the only people awake in this space. There is no sign of anything, but things are going wrong, and I guess we have to fix it or we're all just dead. And so there are different elements of horror that you're trying to emulate. And part of how, again, I think I said at the beginning of this, not a fan of horror movies, specifically jump scare ones, but it's nice to sit down and watch a movie from sort of removing the emotional aspect of it and watching how they tell the story. What are the constraints? What is preventing these people from escaping their situation? Sometimes it is just purely you're isolated. You know, in The Thing, they're in the South Pole and there is nobody there but them. There is no having an NPC there doesn't do you any good initially. Now, if you're moving on and the party is starting to be like, oh God, we need something. And then maybe and again, the other players having that narrative truth, they might be like, someone stumbles in from the cold. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? Who are you? And another player might be like, he's so-and-so from another camp. Or he's a survivor from another camp. And then another player goes, he tells us they're all dead. And like that, a lot of the NPC interaction, because they're introduced as a truth, either you as a GM can go, you meet a stranger. And then it's up to the rest of the table to figure out who or what that is, because you're all building off of that. Yet you meet a stranger, yes, and he's got he's covered himself in crosses, yes, and he's speaking and he keeps praying to himself in Latin. Okay, this guy's a religious fanatic who thinks that he thinks he's surrounded by like vampires or something. And then that gives a really interesting opportunity, because what if it works? what if the crosses work against them? Or this guy like, oh, the crosses keep him away, and he walks out and it's not the crosses, it's something else. Like one of them has a battery in it, and the battery goes out and he's standing in the dark, and then he's just, he just gets eaten. Like that's you having those NPCs helps you tell what kind of monster these are, what kind of horror these things are. In a way
show it in a way that's not direct to the players as well, right. I guess as well.
Because because killing off a player like that with an NPC, you could just be like, "Oops, they're dead." They don't get a conflict roll. They aren't because yes, you're all normal people, but you're not main characters. They are all main characters. Those players have more agency than these poor sods hanging around.
Oh God, I was born an NPC.
Yeah. Oh no. Why didn't I have cool anime hair? I wanted to be a main character. But yeah, you can have like, what can this NPC do to drive that forward? Oh, does he give them a little more hope and then it gets, squashed away from them? Give them a little bit of a break from that roller coaster, a little breath in the music before it turns back on again. And for NPCs, if an NPC shows up, if the players don't give you a lot of information, the three things you really need are a name, one or two distinct physical features, and what they do. What is their job, metaphorically. And so, like, Old Man Jenkins, this crazy guy who thinks he's got this shock white hair and he's made himself like a fake priest collar and has covered himself in crosses, and has like a Latin phrase book in his pocket because he doesn't actually know Latin. He just went hard into the belief that this will keep him away. And that's all you need for that character for the time being. And then letting
you interact and stuff, you can just
let the players kind of figure it out. And that's, again, knowing sort of where the monsters are coming from and how to make the monsters. I will say the downside of that, like knowing what the monsters want, is it does make them a little more logical. And it's part of horror, especially if you're going a little more H.P. Lovecraft, eldritch horror, where it is this massive unknowable entity that's just consuming stars and eating all of the light, is that monster doesn't have to make sense. It's just doing things to do things that we can't possibly wrap our brains around. But having something that is a little more natural, yes, it does take away some of that horror of the unknown, because it's like, oh, they're afraid of the light and they keep finding electrical sources. They keep finding batteries and eating the batteries. Okay, that's good to know. We just need to make sure we don't have anything electronic. And you give them a little bit of a win. But everyone knows at the end it doesn't matter, because they're all going to die eventually.
And especially with that as well, you're going to run out of batteries. You're going to run out of electricity. The lights are going to go out because they're making sure. You can't keep them away
for long. And you know what human brains run on? Electricity. Brains and hearts. Guess what? We're basically like, yeah. And that's where having a background, like, again, just figure out what makes the monsters do what they do. And that's really informed by one of your other players. And you also have an ace in the hole with another player, the player you gave a break to, because the monsters saw them do something. And the NPC, maybe he's this vampire guy and he walks up to the other player and, he's like, oh yes, I keep all these crosses and things because it keeps him away. And he walks up to the player to the GM's left and he goes, hello, brother. They are waiting for us. Bring them. And just completely flip the switch on him. And then it's like, oh, fuck. One, this guy knows something that we don't know. And two, they can communicate through this person. And now, is it an act? Are they mind controlling? I don't know what this is, but it's freaky as hell. And it's really dark in this room. And I would like this game to be over quickly.
And it's immediately involving you as well. Like, it's like, shit. Because, again, if it just happened to an NPC, it's like, oh, that's horrifying. But also, like, it's scarier if it happens to you, and like directly going to that character and referencing something specific.
And I have, again, I know the brinks of the player to my left, and I know the brink of the monsters. Typically, at the start, everyone kind of goes around and does a real quick descriptor of their character. Hi, I'm blank. I'm, it's almost like a dating reel. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm 35 years old, used to be in the army, and I've got a bum leg.
I like
and
long walks on the beach.
Yeah, I like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. That's really that's all you need. But as you do like the voicemails and things, you start to develop and get an idea for who these people are. Mm-hmm. But if you have a group of players that know how to push each other's buttons a little bit and can push those brinks, that's where a lot of the magic happens, is letting everybody sort of play around with it. Some of the best games I've had with this are with other GMs, because they know how to push the buttons and also to step back from the limelight and give it to somebody else and really throw the narrative ball around.
And they know as well, like, because I think players instinctively always want things to go right. And when you start to GM and put yourself in more of the storytelling role, you see the benefits that things going wrong can do. Like, you see that those open up so many opportunities. So I feel like if you're GMing for like a group of people who have experienced GMing as well, I feel like they are more willing to also open up opportunities of things going weird and bad.
What wild and interesting things happen when you, like, a natural one, favorite die in the world. I don't care. Like a critical failure as a GM and as a player is my favorite role to make. I love failures because it gives the GM free reign to, like, cool, what do I get to deal with now? What terrible things are going to happen?
So many opportunities to, like, just meddle with things and change and I just love it.
That's how I've had failures make my BBEG for a game, for a mini game, because someone was trying to basically channel lightning through a group to like metaphorically cleanse them of something that was kind of implanted in them, and I was like, he nat one-ed his call lightning, or however he was conjuring lightning. And instead of basically vaporizing all of the tiny bits of metal in the bodies, it just pushed them all out of the group and all into that player. And that player eventually was like the villain of the first arc of the campaign, because that player was crazy. Like, hey, this character, I don't like, we had a scheduling conflict. He wasn't able to play. And I was like, cool, can I take this character? Can I do something with this? And he said, sure, go for it. And away we went. And I was fortunate enough, but that never would have happened if it hadn't been for that nat one. And just rolling with those failures and making failures interesting and mean something.
I can just imagine how excited you were when it's like, can I do something with this character? I there's some really interesting and awesome things that I have planned. Can I please?
Yeah. Like, especially in like longer form games, because this, again, your characters are dead in 90 minutes. This is not a long form game. This isn't, if you have a group of people together, Halloween, playing this game on Halloween is so good. It is a perfect horror game for the more traditional unsettling Halloweens. Because you can also play like Mothership, which is a little more action adventure, a little more action filled. You could play Dread, which is, you don't roll dice, but you're pulling from a Jenga tower. But having that isolation in the darkness, especially as someone who has like a triple coating of blue light filter on his glasses, and all of my screens are as amber tinted as I can get them because I'm constantly staring at these screens. Having no screens, having no alternate source of light, and sitting in the dark is not something we do a lot anymore. And it's nice to remember that there are the dark is unsettling to us, no matter how hard we try to make it go away as a society. We've got streetlights, we have all these bright, shining things, but it's as someone who was born and raised in the country, there's going outside and seeing stars is something I don't get a lot in my apartment complex. Mm-hmm. And going outside and seeing stars and seeing the night sky, and sometimes if I'm lucky and it's really clear, like bands of the Milky Way. And then when, again, on the opening page, the sun goes out, the stars go out, everything is darkness. And that mental picture of just this vast expanse of sky above me winked out is what is so unsettling. And I want to sit in that feeling and really just milk it for all it's worth.
I am so jealous of you right now.
Sorry. Can you tell him a DM? I just monologued for like 10 minutes about darkness.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I love it so much. Seriously, I am so insanely jealous because I moved 2 years ago, and so I haven't been able to find like groups down here, and especially groups that are willing to play other games. Mm-hmm. And just like the thought of being able to get a group together in person and go somewhere dark and quiet with just like subtle, unsettling music in the background with those candles. Yeah. Oh, I want it so bad. Like,
also, another upside to this game, there's no minimum player count. You could do this one-on-one. Mm-hmm. The GM would have to write the player would probably write a vice and you write a virtue, or you'd have to do something interesting to do that sort of character creation, but you could play this one-on-one.
I was thinking of that actually. When I started reading it yesterday, I was like at night, I'm like, how could I play this? Because I have one sibling in my household who would play a game with me, and I'm like, would you be interested in playing a tragic horror game where we just sit in the dark and just around candles,
and just play? And yeah, you could do it with one person. You can do it with two. Having it with two makes there be sort of this asymmetric, not quite traitor mechanic. Like, it's not Betrayal at House on the Hill where it's like, haha, I'm the villain. But like, it is these two people, and there is a tragic point to that, where it's these two people sort of against the world, and that adds its own spice to that isolation. Because it's like, maybe it's the two of you trying, maybe it's, those two characters trying to make their way to, like, almost like the end of, or the beginning of I Am Legend, where they're just trying to get to a location. They're just like, they're part of the mass, and their struggle, their conflict is trying to just be part of the larger picture. And they get more and more isolated as it goes on, as people drop off, as people go their own separate ways. And maybe by like scene 4 or a scene like 5 or 6, it's a small group of 4 trying to get somewhere, and you can play with that sort of that change, finding the here's a 747 full of people has just landed because the sky's gone dark and they can't navigate by the stars anymore. So the plane lands at the nearest airport, and you have to get out, you're just trying to get out of the plane, and it's pandemonium. And there's, one of the players has seen whatever they are, and the other player, your monster's informed by one player. The monsters have leverage over player 2, and player 2 has leverage on player 1, and you have this sick and twisted murderous love triangle there.
Really good dynamic. There's so much you could do there. Oh.
And what is that? And what kind of stories can you tell with that? Because you're not telling you're not telling the story of, and that's a little more Book of Eli than a little more survival horror than necessarily the large group dynamics. But you can do, it plays pretty well at various player counts. I've never tried it one-on-one. Just because there's a lot of my playtesting has been sort of kind of figuring things out in medium to large groups where we don't want to play another RPG that night. We don't want to play something that takes a lot of prep because the book literally tells you don't prep anything. It just says don't. Just get in,
just have fun, go in blind.
And I've played it with three players, 4 players, and 6 players. Six is a lot because you're trying to bounce the scenes around, and you might only get to name one truth with that many players, especially once you get down to like lower counts. Especially because if you extinguish a candle, you name the first truth. So if the same player keeps making dumb choices and or the same character, I should say, keeps making dumb choices and then extinguishing candles, if you're sitting on the wrong side of them, you might only get to do 2 truths for the whole game.
Yeah, and I think adding more players in most RPGs makes it more complicated because it is just having to share the spotlight and splitting it up correctly to make sure everyone's getting involved. It starts to get much, much trickier. However,
because in this one, the upside of that, unlike Misspent Youth, unlike Blades in the Dark, unlike D&D, your hit points are effectively communal. Because your hit points are the candles, not your cards. You have your cards as sort of your get out of jail free cards to like get your rerolls in, but there's not a lot. Once the candles go out, your character, who may have been perfectly fine the whole game, lives out the horror dream of he's like, oh, I'll go check this thing out, and just gets absolutely devoured on the way in, and that's the end of it. Six worked because we had a bunch of former GMs in it, and we were able to really throw that narrative ball around really well. I would do this, especially starting out, I would do this with 3 or 4 players. But it is, if you have someone that you trust to tell really compelling and really, really dark stories with, you could absolutely do this one-on-one.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds insane. God, I want to play this game so bad. And it's making me think, because we go in the summertime, we go up to Ohio, and my brother lives in the mountainous area of Ohio, like southern Ohio. And the cabin that we stayed last time was so dark, where we could actually see the bands of the Milky Way and everything. It was amazing. And all I can think about is, what if I get I have my brother, my sibling, and then there's we know some other people down there as well. I'm like, we could just get like a group together,
small group.
We could wait until people are asleep or something, because it also makes it spooky with other people in the house that aren't playing a little bit. And just wait until it gets dark, light those candles, and play and see what happens. And that just sounds like that sounds so perfect.
I would love my dream for this game, and I got close to it. I want to go to, there's a couple spots in Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, that are like national protected dark zones.
Ooh.
Where there are once the sun goes down, it's far enough away from any cities or major light pollution. It is the perfect place for stargazing, for larger weather, examining weather effects and stuff like that. And that's a spot I want to get one of those cabins, because it's one of those spots where if you open the door with the light on behind you, you see your silhouette cast out in front of you in the light. There's a rectangle of the light, and that is it.
Oh, that sounds so good.
Oppressive darkness. And I want, we got pretty close, but I just want that feeling that once this candle goes out, you have nothing, there is nothing to see with until 5 minutes later when your eyes adjust. And actually when we did that the last time and we went to use our phones, we forgot that we had the light on when we recorded, so the phone brightness was all the way up.
Oh
so
no!
you hit the button, and there's just this beacon of light come just like screaming in. Oh, that was
absolutely burn your eyes out.
It was not stellar. It was not my favorite thing in the world. But like, and that was the moment that kind of broke that was the end kind of popping up on the screen, because we all had a laugh about it. And then we went and we hit play, and that's when we started really mourning these characters for a bit, like once we got into it. And
I love that it does have that mechanic of like recording and being able to mourn at the end, because that is genuinely, I think, a good way to do a little bit of you kind of joked about aftercare a little bit, but yeah, like a little bit of aftercare for the session. Like you just went on this journey, and just being able to take some time and mourn the loss of these characters and what happened in the story is absolutely important.
Yeah, and in sort of like it's a mini funeral for them, honestly. Because you're sitting with those feelings and sitting with those characters, and that's something that I picked up from reading, that I really appreciate from reading Alice is Missing, which if I ever get to play it, that's one you should do an episode on, because I've mentioned it twice, so you know it's good. But yeah, in having that, because that's something we don't get a lot in D&D, because death doesn't matter. Once you have a third level spell slot for Revivify, you're like, I got a diamond, you're good, get back up in there.
There's no stakes.
Once death isn't an obstacle, what's the point? One of my favorite characters was a monk who had 6 constitution. Again, that's a DM thing. I love playing characters with a glaring weakness. 6 constitution, and that character was on death's door like every fight, and it was the most fun I've had playing D&D in years. Because we didn't have a cleric, or if we did have a cleric, she was off doing rogue things because she was a cleric rogue. And I'm like, cool, I'm just a really old dude who punches people.
Yeah, I just want to have fun. Like, I love that as well. I'm the next D&D, and probably, hopefully, one of my last D&D games, at least long term, that I'm going to do, is I'm playing someone who's going to be a scientist, and he's an older gentleman. And we rolled for stats, and I got decent stats, and I asked, hey, could I actually like bring my intelligence stat like way down, please? Because he is an absolute idiot. Like, man is trying to be a scientist, trying to like pretend and put up the facade that he's smart, but he's an absolute idiot. And I believe he also has really bad constitution, because he is also an old man who's like just on the brink of survival.
Give me low stats. If I want an 18, if I get an 18, it's because I have tanked other stats to do it. This monk at level 12 had 36 hit points. I was gaining 1 hit point per level, and it was my favorite thing ever. I took 72 damage and was instantly killed at the end of that campaign, and it was it was fall damage. I took 72 fall damage and died.
But that's like such a story.
Full splat.
I love negatives. I love bad so much. And one of my players is very much, I like all of my stats to be good so that I'm good at everything. And I'm like, if that's how you want to play, sure. But like, negatives are fun. Negatives start really fun story moments where there are flaws or just things that your character isn't good at, or even like constitution. You're playing an old man. You're not
old
super
man
healthy.
With breathing problems. Like that was his thing. His like, and that's part of what I love about this particular game, is because it's like it feeds into the negatives. People, you're not heroes. You are just people doing your best, and unfortunately, your best isn't going to be enough. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Exactly. And people and normal people have issues. Normal people aren't perfect. They have their problems. That's why the Brink and the Vice are just so great.
You have things that you're people. You exist in this sort of like this lovely balance of good and bad habits, and eventually, like, yeah, you'll be driven to do truly desperate things. You already have been driven to do truly desperate things when the game starts.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that going to define your character? Are they going to do, because like, you're not walking into that situation go, oh, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do when my character, like, oh, my character's going to stand and fight and he's going to die with with a gun in his hand and a knife in his teeth. He's going to go full Rambo. But if the guy next to you is like, hey, I watched you push a woman down so you could get away, that immediately informs how your character is going to act when push comes to shove.
Yeah, you can't expect anything from your character until you're done with character creation. And even then.
And then you have the first scene is so tentative. Everyone's trying to feel out how their characters are.
And who they are, yeah.
And find out who they are. Find a voice that fits them. And if you don't really want to do voices, you don't have to. And that honestly makes it better, because when the game is over, you don't hear like someone, drop a character voice or drop an accent and they're themselves again. They're the same person they were when the end came for them.
Mm-hmm.
And how, it's so emotionally cathartic, because at the end you want to like curl up in a blanket and have a good cry and sleep for days. And it is like just that incredibly cathartic feeling, because this was the last time we played was the first time this group of people had seen each other since COVID started, all in the same place. And it was this big raucous celebration. We were having fun, we were drinking, and then this moment of drop dead sobriety. I get like everyone was like, we were all still having beers and everything because it was still a party, but then like people made drinks to start the game and those drinks were untouched the entire night for that entire session, because everyone just was in on it. And then everyone's like, I think I need to go to bed. And that was just like
I need to go to sleep. Yeah,
I need to like process this for a while. And that was sort of the like that breath in the middle. And you mentioned like having creepy music on it. This is a game where creepy music and silence are equally as powerful. Because you can have a soundtrack kind of playing out. You could throw on some ambient horror music. But having those moments where, because after a while your brain just kind of tunes it out because it's just kind of background noise, and then you pause it. And your brain is like, it's like you're in the dark and you're following like a handrail on a staircase in a house you don't know. And you're like, okay, here's the handrail. And you step forward and you reach and the handrail just disappears. It just stops. And your brain's like, I need to keep going downstairs. There should be something here. What's missing? And it just adds a little extra psychological, a tickle, a little, just like a tingle up and down the spine of like something is different.
Absolutely. And like, especially, I think some of the best music that if you were to like pick music for a game like that would be a like soundtrack where it fades in and out on its own. And it's like wispy.
Avoid jump scare music.
Yeah, like
this is not a horrific jump scare game.
It's wind and like subtle little creaky noises or
drip,
just like
a little bit of dripping, like dripping water and echoes.
Like small things just to like because if it's spaced out enough, when it happens, you're gonna like notice it immediately. It's like, what the fuck is that?
the game's a bit of a sensory deprivation tank. And you're just like, you get more and more and more isolated. And that's the game where like there was a knock at the door and a table of 7 leapt out of their chairs and screamed because we had completely forgotten that there was food coming and it was late because we got into it. And
there were other people.
There is no world outside those 10 candles and the bowl that That's something that like once you're playing, like having that just a metal bowl in the middle, and that becomes the brightest thing in the room once the card burns, and it flares up because it's just paper, it just and then your eyes adjust, and then once it's gone and the reroll happens, everything's just a little extra dark as your eyes adjust back to
bitter taste as well after like you have to burn a card.
Oh, it's so good. This is not informative part of the podcast. This is literally
this is
just gushing about
loving on the game. Yeah, exactly.
Like a whole pile of sensory things that I hope I'm describing well for the players, because otherwise, or for the listeners, because otherwise I'm just like making weird noises and talking about things, and they're like, "Why is this? How does the game work? How do I play? Where do I buy this game?"
Yeah, I mean, like on the website itself, I don't. You said the name earlier. If you would like to repeat that again.
Yes. So it's written by Stephen Dewey. It is published by Cavalry Games. And I believe I'm gonna just do a quick Google here.
Also, I just want to mention that we're recording this like at night, and it just makes me even happier.
It's just getting darker and darker and creepier, and it's wonderful. So yeah, but yeah, cavalrygames.com /10 candles. That is spelled out TEN is the website. You can take a look at it. It's got a couple of awards and accolades. But I believe there's a how to play, a couple of reviews, some mini reviews. Oh shoot, I forgot. The Geek and Sundry, RP Geek and Sundry. Ivan Van Norman is one of the best horror GMs I've seen in a very long time. He does a playthrough that is available on if you're on cavalrygames.com, there are links to actual plays if you want to see how it works. Ivan Van Norman does a Dread playthrough as well, and is a master. He is a master worker of horror games and running horror RPGs.
That sounds
it's so
amazing.
Good. But yeah, PDF I believe is $10 on their website. The soft cover is $28. But yeah, I believe Stephen Dewey is like a solo guy. He's just a dude doing his thing.
As well, yeah.
A solo publishing company. So
after reading the PDF, I haven't gotten through the entire thing, but like I'm like trying to resist because I have too many books. But it's like, a like physical copy of this just to flip through and look at.
Yeah, the physical copies are great. There are also, for running the game, you can get a single page like cheat sheet that tells you.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah, there are cheat sheets available. I printed out a couple and I keep them in my copy of the book because I hand them out to player. Like I had a couple on the table for players to reference during the first scene when there's the most light. And then you slowly, as the lights go down and people stop needing them, they kind of fall to the side. And the game is
pretty easy itself. That after kind of the first like scene or two, you get your first 2 or 3 rolls. You're like, okay, here's how this works, and then your first moment pops up and your first brink pops up, and then other than that, it's a fairly routine thing. If it went on for any longer, it would start to get boring. But because every conflict roll has a less and less and less chance of succeeding, your last 4 candles you'll rip through pretty quickly, unless your players are annoyingly lucky. But I think just in odds alone and continuing to do conflicts, like it's gonna happen.
Because that is, you are coming up on the end. Things are after them. Or they're just trying to survive. Like they've made it out and they are completely alone, but they can't, they could absolutely wander off into the wilderness, into the Arctic, into wherever, and just try to survive. But that would be like, hey, you're still wandering, make a conflict roll, and over time, you'll wear them down. And they will fall. And they, it's their choice. Do they want to just start, they fall 3 times, another third one, they don't get back up again. Is that the ending that they're feeling? Or are they going to just keep walking until until they're just like fall asleep and don't wake up. Like I don't,
Yeah.
and again, they get to pick that, so they have the first and last word on how they on how their characters go out. And it is.
I just love how much control over the story that you want to play you have.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's one of the most player empowering games I've seen in a very long time.
Even though you die.
And then part of that liberation is, yeah, there is no way your character is going to survive. Remove that possibility from your noggin. We're gonna tell the stories of what happens to people who will die, but are going to do everything they can to not die.
And you just have to kind of vibe through it.
you gotta fight, and fight as hard and long as you can until you can't anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's so good. It's such a like narratively juicy time. And now I really want to play it, but all of my friends are busy this weekend, so I can't be like, guys, let's go. Hello, I need a weekend.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think we're at the end though for this episode. I mean, this has been the longest recording so far, but I have had an amazing time during the entire thing. I am just absolutely desperate to play this game now. Absolutely desperate. I was already wanting to play it so much before even talking, but now, like, listening to the stories that you have and, like, just the possible outcomes and things that could happen with just exploring the game, I want to play it so bad.
I wish my players shared that enthusiasm, because I'm like, guys, here's this really cool game, and I try to summarize, and they're like, I mean, it's kind of cool. And I'm like, guys, you don't understand what I want to do here. They're like, yeah, but like,
appreciate it.
I've got a really cool warlock I want to try. I'm like, no, stop taking Hexblade. Play something else.
I want to murder you, please.
I have capital T thoughts on Hexblade Warlock, but that's neither here nor there, because Wizards is currently making wonderful choices with their OGL, I'm sure. But anyway, yeah,
that's its own bucket of beans. Like,
yes, that's its own podcast. But yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a blast. I will take any opportunity to shout from the hilltops how awesome some of these games are. That like,
yes,
when 9 times out of 10 people are kind of aware of Dread because it had a little more of a cult following as a horror game. Mothership.
And I've heard very good things about that as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, there's no character sheet. You fill out like a personality questionnaire, and that sort of informs your character. Like, loaded questions, which I love. But and then like Mothership just had a very successful Kickstarter for their actual first edition, which is truly like sci-fi horror in space, where you took the Alien franchise and filed off the serial number.
Mm-hmm.
But 10 Candles is like, if I can play in person, I bring 10 Candles every time I get to a gaming meetup, because I want nothing. It's a little bit of like, I have a bag of candles, a whole box of Sharpies, and a whole box of index cards. And I'm like, do you want to play a game? And they're like, why is this man chasing me with Sharpies and index cards and a bag of candles? Leave me alone. I just want to play other things. But I want to play cute animals that just wander around a magical land. Leave me alone. I only want to kill you a little bit. Is that okay? But
you just want to find people who are just as excited about dying as you are. Like, yeah, that is that's the moral of the story.
You'd think millennials would be more interested in this game than they are.
No, I think Gen Z's your audience. Come on.
I'm ancient compared to those kids. I'm like 30.
I'm one of those kids.
Yeah, I'm a wizened old man. I was there when 4th edition happened. I was there when Pathfinder was born. Yes, well, now that I've sufficiently aged myself to a geriatric old man, I'm gonna go drink some prune juice and go to bed.
No, but seriously, this has been amazing. Like, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for coming on.
I would love to come back and either you talk through games you have on your shelf that I don't have on mine, or games on my shelf that you don't have on yours.
That would be amazing. I would love to have you back on. That would be absolutely fantastic.
100%.
Yeah, so I think we're going to end the episode there. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and please play 10 candles, like find a group that want to die and have fun. Have a great time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the RPG Goblin. Again, 10 Candles is such an amazing game. If you love horror games and really want to try 10 Candles out, please make sure to go check out the website and get yourself a PDF or a physical copy. It's always great to support the artists. Next episode will be coming out March 3rd, and will be all about a game called Rune, which is a solo RPG that I am so excited to share with you guys. I ended up finding it one late day of searching all over itch.io. But yeah, again, thank you to Curtis for coming onto this podcast and being able to talk all about 10 Candles. Make sure to follow his show. The name of so will be in the description of this episode. And also make sure to follow the RPG Goblin on all of its social medias, which will also be in the description of this episode. Thank you again, and see you next time.